You can sit here still. I got 4 seats.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all here tonight. We have an exciting night here tonight with our double study day. And you can see lots of effort's been put in, which is really great to see. So tonight, we're in the first study. We've got Brother Paul Yearsley going to be giving his first talk on Abagail and Michal, the choice to be courageous, committed, and comprehending. So we look forward to that, but first of all, we'll just open with a hymn, 123, and then an opening prayer. Great God of heaven and earth, our loving Father, you are high above us, and your ways are above our ways. Your name is holy, and we are grateful that we can have the privilege to bear it because of what your Son has done. We are so grateful that we all can have a personal relationship with you through Christ, and that we have a purpose in life because of you. We can have joy, peace, and forgiveness because of you. We have salvation because of you. And we have each other to share this with and encourage each other because of what you have done for us through Christ. Please be with us this evening and help us to open our hearts to what Brother Paul has taken from your word to share with us. Help us to actually change our own lives and not just hear your word without taking action. And help us to genuinely look out for one another and give us wisdom to know what to say and do for others, because there are many with aching hearts and struggling underneath the surface. We pray for your kingdom. And please send our Lord Jesus Christ soon. And it's through him, our Saviour and King, that we pray. Amen. So, as mentioned, our first talk tonight will be on Abagail and Michal. And to introduce that talk, we'll have a reading from 1 Samuel 25 verse 32 to 35, and then 2 Samuel 6 verse 20 to 23. And so we'll ask Colin Kennett to come up and read that, and then if Uncle Paul could come straight up after that. Thanks.
Alright, good evening everyone. And we read two passages, first of which being 1 Samuel 25 verse 32 to 35. And David said to Abagail, "Blessed be Yahweh God of Israel, which sent thee this day to meet me. And blessed be thy advice, and blessed be thou, which hast kept me this day from the coming to shed blood, and from avenging myself and mine own hand. For in very deed, as Yahweh God of Israel liveth, which hath kept me back from hurting thee, except thou hast hasted and come to meet me, surely there had not been left unto Nabal by the morning light any man." So David received of her hand that which she had brought him, and said unto her, "Go up in peace to thine house. See, I have hearkened to thy voice, and have accepted thy person." 2 Samuel 6, verse 20 to 23. Then David returned to bless his household. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, "How glorious was the king of Israel today, who uncovered himself today in the eyes of the handmaids of his servants, as one of the vain fellows shamelessly uncovereth himself." And David said unto Michal, "It was before Yahweh, which chose me before thy father, and before all his house, to appoint me ruler over the people of Yahweh, over Israel. Therefore will I play before Yahweh. And I will yet be more vile than thus, and will be base in mine own sight. And of the maidservants which thou hast spoken of them shall I be had in honour." Therefore Michal the daughter of Saul had no child until the day of her death.
I'm so excited to be here. This whole thing of David, the whole story of David, has always resonated with me deep down. You look at the whole, and I'm so excited that you're dealing with all the people that impacted him, his friends and foes. It's such an awesome study. You know, he is, as you know, the man after God's own heart. And for me, that's always resonated with me. I want to be that guy. I've always wanted to be that guy that connected deeply with our Heavenly Father and was on the same page, the same wavelength, with his same values, understood what was important to him, had the same passion. I've looked at that and I wanted to be loved by God the way David was loved by God, and I want that for you. When you, through the journey of your life, when you get to my age, and you've looked at it over and over again, and more things come out, to see it resonate with you. And I want that desire, that's my desire, for you to have that passion and interest in being the one that was the man after God's own heart. It's awesome. So, very excited. We're going to start off with a little story. It may embarrass one or two people here tonight, this afternoon, but nevertheless, I want to tell it. Some of you may know that our family travels to Seal Rocks for a family holiday for a couple of weeks in January. And we've been doing that for, I guess, coming up to nearly 20 years. For us, we've only just moved, but most of the time we'd travel there, we were travelling from the Southern Highlands in New South Wales, which was a 5-hour trip to this place called Seal Rocks, this beautiful campground on the beach, this magical place, my favourite place to be. I can go out in the sun, in the water and surf with my friends. I watch my kids grow up with all their friends into that vortex, and we have such a great time, and it's an awesome place and a very exciting holiday for us that we've made a family tradition, and my kids love it so much they go, we're never going to stop coming here. We want to bring our kids here as well. But it wasn't always that fun, because we used to travel 5 hours, as I said, which is a little bit stressful with all your camping gear in tow. And then usually on a hot day in the summer, you have to get there and set up all your camp stuff, tents, tarps and whatever. And in my wisdom, there was no shade at this place, so I picked the biggest tarp I could find. It was 10 by 11 metres, and for 10 years I would travel to this campground and set up this 10 by 11 metre tarp. Do you know how big that is? It probably nearly fills this whole room. There was 44 poles, like steel poles, and you got to understand that at every pole there's a rope that goes down to a peg. You have to bash into this hard ground at least 44 times. So the tarp used to take 2 hours to set up, and then everything else was like 5 hour setup. So as dad with 4 daughters and a wife who was somewhat helpful, it was exhausting, and in the heat you'd be looking at the kids going, Olivia, can you hold that pole there? Millie, hold on to that rope tight. And that would last for about 3 minutes, and then there'd be, what's that over there? And then Caitlin would say, can we go to the beach now? And as that went on, and as you got hotter, I would get more frustrated, and the mental disintegration would start to happen, and I would start getting very snappy. And then it was all over, and you finally look around and you see the caravan people that had been there in their comfort, sitting on their deck chairs, drinking their beer, watching this entertainment happening of the Yearsley mental breakdown. It was not the best time. Not the best time of my character being displayed. It was a bit of a meltdown and somewhat embarrassing sometimes. The reason I'm telling you that is when we're under the pump, we don't always react the best, do we? We become reactive and snappy. And in this story of Abagail, the first story we're going to look at, we've got David, who is in a highly emotional state. And I want to, before we move on, I want to paint the picture of the emotional state that David's in at this point, where we need to understand when this interaction with Abagail happens, is David's world had been turned upside down from being the hero that was loved by everyone to this outlaw and who was being pursued by this mad, jealous and paranoid king. And this is, I made a bit of a list here of the stress that David was under, how much David was under the pump. And I want you to appreciate this and maybe cut David a little bit of slack for the way he behaves, which is not his finest moment in this story, in his life. So we need to understand that his wife Michal, when he first had to flee from Saul, let him out of a window and escape the palace. And he never saw her again for 19 and a half years, if you do the calculations, until he became king of all Israel and Judah. And in that time, his wife was given away to someone else. And as we go through these, I want you to think about how you would feel in your heart if this happened to you. He was a fugitive for when you do the calculations, for roughly 12 years he was hunted, it says, like a flea or a partridge in the mountains. He was in caves and forests and rocks and deserts. And at this time of Abagail, I would only be guessing, but maybe he's halfway through this experience where he's been hunted. Do you know, years ago, I forget when it was, but there was this guy, Australia's most wanted man. He killed a policeman, done all these other horrible things, and he was on the run for 7 years. His name was Malcolm Naden, I think. And they finally captured him. And when he got captured, he said to them, "It's such a relief. I'm so sick of being on the run for 7 years." Where he always had to sleep with one eye open, always living with a high degree of stress and anxiety. And this is the same with David. Not only that, his associates were 400 to 600. This is what it says about them. This is how it describes his associates. They were disgruntled and bitter, wicked, worthless men. The majority of them did not share his integrity, his outlook on life. They were his companions. And when we're talking about his companions, his best friend, who we're going to talk about in the next study, Jonathan, he saw once in that 12-year period. And even then, we're not even told how long. It doesn't seem like it was for a very long time at all. He had to relocate his elderly parents to a safe house in a foreign country the foreign country of Moab, because he was so worried about them. He made some poor choices, which were unfortunate, not evil, but poor choices, and the consequences of them were severe. He made this choice where his men were so hungry, he goes to the tabernacle at Nob and asks the priest for some bread, and they give him this old showbread. And Doeg, remember this story? Doeg the Edomite's in the background, and he dobs on him. And Saul comes along and says to his men, "Execute the priest." And no one wanted to do it. And Doeg said, "I'll do it." He pulls out his sword and he executed and wiped out the whole priesthood in one day. 85 priests. And Abiathar was the sole survivor and ran to David. And David has this meltdown, emotional meltdown, and realises the poor choice he had made. And this is what it says in 1 Samuel 22. He says, "I have caused the death of all the persons of your father's house." And then he says these beautiful words, "Stay with me." Imagine how the emotional distress he felt at that event. And then he had this terrible situation where he protected this little city of Keilah and saved them from the attacks by the Philistines, saved them all. They were so relieved, and then they just betray him back to Saul. Betrayal, he had to deal with that. And then a huge one, I think, was that his mentor, Samuel, dies. And this is an old man that he would have had many spiritual discussions with and loved deeply. He was the one that first anointed him as a young man, a youth. He was the one that when Saul started to persecute him, he ran to. And Samuel dies, and they have a funeral which is 50 kilometres away, and it says all Israel mourned and buried him, and here's David not being able to go to that funeral. So you can see how much stress David would have been under, how much pain, where his emotional bucket was filling up with all this stuff he had to deal with. I don't know how he'd cope with it. And he pours out his feelings. You want to know how he felt? Well, it's pretty easy, because there are psalms that he writes in the early days which explain how he felt. It says that he was lonely, he had this heart pain, he was distressed. There was no spiritual peers there. He felt forsaken. His heart was like wax melting. He was weary from crying. He was full of heaviness. These are his emotions being poured out and expressed in his songs. And so this is the This is the context we need to understand when we come to this whole story in 1 Samuel 25 of Abagail. Now, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to summarise the basic story and pick out a couple of key phrases. So if we can go to 1 Samuel 25, we're joining the story where David's in this highly emotional and vulnerable state. And we're introduced to Nabal and Abagail. And in verses 2 to 3, we read about Nabal, who was super rich. He had 3,000 sheep, 1,000 goats. But it describes him in verse 3 as a harsh and evil man. Verse 17, a scoundrel. And they were shearing his sheep in Carmel, which was about 2 k's away from Maon, where David was. And even when you think about that, they're shearing sheep, you get wool, you get money for wool. So it would have been rolling on all this money from all this event that was happening. And it describes his wife Abagail as someone in a contrasting way. She was good, she had good of understanding and beautiful. And we know from verse 42, she had at least 5 personal maidservants. So she was living in luxury with this guy, but they were quite different. And he was a terrible man to live with. Still married to him. And David and his men lived amongst the shepherds of this rich landlord, and were good to them. It says it says that his men and David were like a wall to these shepherds. They protected them, they cared for them. And one day, David and his men, as the story unfolds, is hungry. He sends men to ask for food. Nabal rejects them and says, "Who's this son of Jesse? He's just another rebel servant," in verse 10. And the anger of David, as you can understand and appreciate, wells up. His bucket is so full from all that other stuff we looked at. This is just another event of injustice. And he blows up. And I can imagine David, if we were hanging around, I can imagine him saying things like, "If it wasn't for me defeating Goliath, the Philistines would have taken all their land and they would have been paying taxes. They wouldn't have been rich. It's because of me that they're free. And we gave him protection the whole time. Look at him. Why are they treating us like that?" I can see the veins in his neck popping out and he's just getting so red and angry. Let's read verse 21 and hear his rage. David had said, "Surely in vain I've protected all that this fellow had in this wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belongs to him, and he has repaid me evil for good." As a result of that, he says to 400 of his 600 men, "Strap on your sword, we're going to go and wipe out all the males in Nabal's household." He has his brain explosion. And you think about that, he wasn't just going to kill Nabal, the evil scoundrel, he was going to kill all the servants. We don't know what those servants were like. They might have been sort of gentle, nice guys. David didn't care, he was going to go and wipe the whole lot of them out. When you think about that, it's an interesting phenomenon of life, isn't it? That someone's strength is often their weakness. You get a passionate guy, he's passionate for Yahweh, he's driven for godly values. Of course, there's going to be times when his buttons are pushed, he's going to blow up and explode the wrong way if he's not careful. There's a godly principle, isn't it, that we all know in Ephesians 4. You can't help anger. Anger's not wrong. It says, "Be angry and sin not." So there has to be a line that is drawn when we do start feeling angry. But the challenge, I think, from this story, and I use it this way, are you going to be a thermometer or a thermostat? Do you know what I mean by that? So a thermometer just simply responds to the heat and reacts to the environment around you. So if it's hot, it's hot. If it's cold, it's cold. It'll just reflect what the environment is. But a thermostat, like in an air conditioning unit in your car or at home, it regulates the heat, doesn't it? So it doesn't matter what the temperature is outside, it regulates and brings the temperature down to a comfortable level. That's what God asks us to be, a thermostat. It's interesting, just a fun fact. I wish I could find this photo. In Paula's hometown near Toronto, in Canada, they had a minus 40 degree day one day when she was young, and her dad Frank took a photo of the thermometer because it was really interesting, because you know what happens at minus 40 in Fahrenheit? Celsius and Fahrenheit are actually exactly the same, minus 40. It's the only time. Fun fact. Wow. So here's David in this story. He's not the thermostat, he's the thermometer, and he's reacting to the heat, and he's been drawn into this vortex of this fool Nabal and potentially becoming the fool, which is what happens. And sometimes when we're in that sort of state, we need others to help us regulate ourselves, don't we? We need each other. And that's where Abagail comes into the picture. She took the heat out of the situation, helped him regulate and realign to godly values. Let's read verse 18, a couple of verses here, 18 and 19. Then Abagail made haste and took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep already dressed, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, 200 cakes of figs, and loaded them on donkeys. And she said to her servants, "Go on before me, see I am coming after you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. You jump down to verse 23. And when Abagail saw David, she dismounted quickly from the donkey, fell on her face before David and bowed down to the ground. So she fell at his feet and said, on me, my Lord, on me let this iniquity be. And please let your maidservant speak in your ears and hear the words of your maidservant. Please let not my Lord regard this scoundrel Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your maidservant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent. Now therefore, my Lord, as Yahweh lives and as your soul lives, since Yahweh has held you back from coming to bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hand, now then, let your enemies and those who seek harm for my Lord be as Nabal. And now this present which your maidservant has brought to my Lord, let it be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please, she says, forgive the trespass of your maidservant. For Yahweh will certainly make for my Lord an enduring house, because my Lord fights the battles of Yahweh, and evil is not found in you throughout your days. Yet a man has risen to pursue you and seek your life. But the life of the Lord, my Lord, shall be bound in the bundle of the living with Yahweh your God. And the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the pocket of a sling. And it shall come to pass when Yahweh has done for my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you ruler over Israel, that this will be no grief to you, nor offence of heart to my Lord, either that you have shed blood without cause, or that my Lord has avenged himself. But when Yahweh has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your maidservant. So here's Abagail. Do you detect the tone of that? There's this humble approach where she's bowing down, her face to the ground, saying there's fault on her family's side. It's bizarre, isn't it? She knows so much about David. How did she know this? She knew that he was a godly man. He fights to honour God. He was anointed to be king. He had a destiny promised by God. Word gets around, and she refers to the injustice of Saul. So what she's doing here, she's validating David's feelings, not discounting them. She said, I get why you're angry. It's this frustration, not just with Nabal, but with the whole story of Saul, the injustice of that. And then she says, you're at the crossroads here of a decision where God's holding you back at this point. You've got to make a decision about where you want to go. God's holding you back by sending me here. And she appeals for him to look at the big picture, where you will be blessed in the end, she says. God's going to avenge your enemies like Saul sooner or later. And I love the way she says, she refers to the sling. He's going to sling them out, which is an obvious allusion to the lions and the bears and Goliath that he was victorious over. And she really appeals to him, don't make this a moment of regret in your life. Wow. How did David take that? Well, we read in verse 32. David said to Abagail, "Blessed is Yahweh, God of Israel, who sent you this day to me. And blessed is your advice, and blessed are you, because you have kept me this day from coming to bloodshed and from avenging myself from my own hand. For indeed, as Yahweh, God of Israel lives, who has kept me back from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, surely by morning light no males would have been left to Nabal." So David received from her hand what she brought to him and said to her, "Go in peace to your house. See, I have heeded your voice and respected your person." See what David's doing here? He's actually saying, thank you, Abagail, for the straight talk. It's a wake-up call I really needed to regulate and realign my actions. And he says he listened to her and respected her for that. There's so many proverbs and wise sayings in the Bible along these lines, isn't it? Where fools get vent to their rage and wise bring calm in the end, and soft answers turn away wrath. And here was a beautiful woman inside and out, appealing and taking the heat out of the anger of David. And when good and decent people respond to that straight talk when they're out of line, especially God-focused people like David. It reminds me, I was at the fire station where I worked one year, and for probably about 10 years I had this guy on my crew who was a very smart operator, very astute, very good at what he did, but his biggest problem was that he was a very negative person, and he was continually critical. He was a bully, and he mocked people when they couldn't do things that he could do and understand things that he could do. And he was like this continual dropping of water day by day. Anyway, we had this particularly bad day, and I was hot and tired, and this guy had been going all day bagging. But there's banter. I love banter. But there's this line of banter where it's not funny anymore. Well, that was that day. And I was looking at the guys on my crew and their body language and the demeanour. This has been going on for months and years, really. And it came to a head, and I blew up, big time. And in front of a couple of the other guys in the mess room, I started doing the pointing thing. I said, "Mate, you are the most negative person on this shift. If you want a decent shift, you've got to start changing your attitude. You've got to lift your game, because look at us, we're all miserable because you're bringing this whole thing down. This could be so much better. We could be working as a team." And I said, "You're a disgrace. You need to change your attitude or move to another station." Anyway, so he started to fire up, and he started pointing back at me, and he said, "Mate, if you don't stop, I'm going to punch you through that wall." And I went, "Okay, well, maybe I will stop then." And I said, "But I'm not finished. We haven't finished this conversation," because I could see he was getting wound up. Anyway, we go home, come back next shift. Lo and behold, we're on the big ladder truck where it's a two-person seat. And I'm sitting there in the passenger seat, and he's driving. It's just me and him. And he could have cut a knife. What's the saying? Could have cut a knife through the air. I don't know. You get a picture. And we bump along down the road, nothing. And I said, I'm not going to tell you his name just in case he finds out I've been talking about it. I said, "Mate, I haven't finished about this. Anyway, as soon as I said that, he blew up and he said, "You're not my mentor, you're not my father, shut up!" You know, like he went off. And I said, "Oh, well, that's the end of that then. I can't say too much more." Dead silence again. We go get a coffee. And then we're driving back to the fire station. And he starts talking and his voice is quivering like he's nearly crying. And he says, "Paul, you're right. You're absolutely right. I've been a disgrace." You know, what happened that day was amazing because there was respect from both sides of the fence. He respected me for the straight talk, but I respected him for thinking about what I'd said and having the courage to change. And it lasted for a little while, and he went back into his old ways, but then he moved to another station. It was all good. So, yeah, interesting. Decent people sometimes do respond to straight talk when they're out of line. So, the next part of this story is that Nabal has this medical episode. You can talk to Austin about what that actually meant. I have no idea. But 10 days later, God strikes him and he dies. And God avenges David's injustice. And that's the thing, isn't it? He says here in verse 39, it says on the screen here, "Blessed be Yahweh who has pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal and has kept his servant from evil. For Yahweh has returned the wickedness of Nabal on his own head." God's done it. I didn't have to do it. God did it. And then he writes later, he wrote Psalm 37, he says, "Do not fret because of evildoers, they soon shall be cut down like grass." And it's true, isn't it, that sooner or later, the wicked of this world are going to face their judgment, whether it's in the kingdom age or before. But for Nabal, it was pretty soon. Like he died 10 days later. God dealt with the unrighteous. Now, as a result of this, David thinks about it, and he's so impressed with Abagail, he invites her to be his wife. Why would he do that? Seriously. That's because she was the virtuous woman that Proverbs often talks about, doesn't it? She's displayed all those magnificent characteristics. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. She opens her mouth with wisdom. A woman who fears the Lord shall be praised. And that's so true for her. And for us guys, that's what you want to find. We all know that. Find your Abagail. And girls, find the male version, whatever that is of that. You know what I mean? So Abagail accepts this offer to be his wife. Now I want you to think about that in the context of who she was and how hard a decision that would have been. Where that's not a small thing. She was this wife in a very comfortable, luxurious position, married to this rich dude, that she was now choosing to leave to join David in all the discomfort of being a fugitive. Think about how hard that would be with all her maidservants and the difficulties of living in caves and rocks and moving constantly. That's a big, big thing that she chose to do, to join David in his discomfort. And there's that story, you know that story, that one of the really big discomfort days that she experienced was, do you remember that how that Philistine king gave David that little town of Ziklag to occupy when he was seeking refuge from Saul? Well, they go there, him and his men go there, and one day they're out doing, raiding and fighting, and Amalekites come in and destroy that whole town, burn it all, take the wives and the children off captive. And the men come back, remember the story? And they're that stressed about it, they are weeping. These grown, tough, battle-hardened soldiers, all weeping, so it says they couldn't weep no more, they were that distressed. And then they wanted a scapegoat, so they said, "David, you're at fault to that." That's one of the stressful situations of living with a man on the run. And she chose to do that. What a beautiful woman. She impacted David a lot, didn't she? Because we don't have time to look at it in detail, but the next chapter, David gets the opportunity to kill Saul again. And I'm sure he had that decision to make again, to take his own vengeance or leave it to God. And the impact of and influence of Abagail would have helped him to be solid again in his integrity. And I love that when he talks to, I think it's Abishai, he said, I'm just going to punch a spear straight through him. I've got the opportunity. And he says, no, you can't do that. God will strike him. His time will come to die naturally, or he'll be killed in battle. It's all good. All right, we better keep moving. Abagail. Be like her. What do I mean by that? There's going to be an appropriate time when you and I are going to need to speak out against ungodly behaviour. And nobody likes confrontation, do they? Put your hand up, you love confrontation. Oh, maybe we shouldn't do that. No one really likes confrontation. It's awkward, it's uncomfortable. And it takes courage. But I want you to think about this. If you don't speak out at the appropriate time, what is the damage and the fallout if you don't? You need to think about that. Wisdom in handling conflict. She was super wise in this. Think about it. She was humble. She acknowledged. So if we want to be an Abagail, we need to be humble and we need to acknowledge any part in the problem. We're not coming from the high and mighty position that I'm always good, I'm always perfect. It's humility is really important if we want to get anywhere. We need to validate feelings of people who are angry and understand their why. Why do they feel like they do? Is there an injustice? We need to validate the fact that they are angry, they are frustrated. You just get over it. We need to paint the big picture like she did. Will you regret the response? You know, there's this saying which goes, I think it goes like, speak when you're angry and you'll give the best speech you ever regret. It's true. Take a breath before you jump in and send the email or send the text message or say what you want to say. It's a bit like this. Caitlin suggested this. When you get angry, take a breath, count to 10. That's good advice. But she likes to throw a punch. You don't. No one expects. You're allowed to say that. No. Okay. So just the first bit's probably the thing we need to look at. All right. We need to value and find. Oh, sorry. There's one other thing. Walk and support in the journey of discomfort. We need to help each other to fulfill the destiny of being a king. And support them in the journey of all the trials and discomforts that happen, like Abagail was prepared to do. I love it in verse 41. We'll just read verse 41. It says, she arose when she was asked to be his wife. She bows her face to the earth and says, here is your maidservant, a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. Here I am just to wash your feet in your discomfort. That's so beautiful. And that's exactly what Jesus talked about when he said, you know what, we've got to get out and wash each other's feet in John 13. I gave you that example. Value and find, appreciate friends. It's not just being like Abagail, it's finding them as well. Especially if you're a passionate person. You know, I'm very thankful for my wife. She's a very calming, gentle influence. She's my Abagail. Isn't that beautiful? Are you listening, darling? She helps make me calm. I'm a pretty fiery, passionate person sometimes. You would never know. But she's so many times she's saying, no, just calm down, just take a breath. Like, it's all good. You need to find people like that, especially if you're a passionate person. We don't have time to talk about this story, so we'll move right along. Just realised, can someone tell me how long I've got to go? Because we need to probably skip a few things here. Who's the timekeeper here?
15 minutes.
15, beautiful. All right, I think I can do something with that. So, the end of this whole story is that in verse 44, this whole story ends with another injustice. And this is the segue into Michal. It says, but Saul, so first of all, David takes Abagail as a wife and Ahinoam, there's another wife, so he's now got 2 wives. But then in verse 44 it says, Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, or Paltiel, as it has in the margin. So his wife was given away in this whole time period. So let's go to 2 Samuel 6 now. Let's have a chat about Michal. So the last time so we're now fast forwarding. Right now, this is so many years later, where David is now king over all Israel and Judah. The last time David saw Michal was when she, as I said before, she helped him escape the palace. If you calculate that, there's 12 years on the run and 7.5 years where he was king just over the tribes of Judah. So the 19.5 years has passed since he's seen his wife. He's got 6 other wives by this point, I think it's 6, including Abagail, who's a beautiful woman. And he says, I want Michal back. Why ask for Michal back? It seems harsh. And, you read the story in 2 Samuel 3, her husband that she was given to is so upset. He's sobbing as she's being sent back to David. Why would David ask for her back? And I'll just go through this. I wanted to spend a little bit more time on this, but first of all, I think there's a political reason. The nation of Israel and Judah are at war, and a long war, it says. And Michal was associated with the house of Saul. So David was working for national unity and peace as he became king over both. I think that's potentially one of the reasons. But I think also the other reason was that he's a man of principle. So he never ever divorced Michal. And he's a very big keeper of his covenants. And that's why he was connected so strongly with God as a man after his own heart, because God's the same. David had killed 200 Philistines. I don't know how easy that is, but I suspect it's pretty hard. He paid that price for her, the bride price. As far as he was concerned, she's still his wife. And there's no children to complicate the issue, so she asks for him back. There's this thing in the Jewish Talmud, which are these ancient Jewish traditions. I don't know how true this is, but they say that Paltiel was this man of honour that never slept with Michal and placed a sword between their beds and respected her still as David's wife. I don't know how true that is, but it's interesting because Michal never had children in 19.5 years. So I'm going to suggest to you we've got a very resentful and bitter Michal, like King Saul, her father. She was disrupted and put in a very uncomfortable situation, but she couldn't comprehend the big picture of why David was doing it. It was just caught up in her bitterness. Then you come to 2 Samuel 6. I love to go into this, but there's a whole background between of 2 Samuel 6, which is the time when the ark was brought up to Jerusalem. You need to check this out because it's so cool that I'll just show you this one slide. David was so passionate about bringing that ark to Jerusalem, what that meant for the nation in terms of godliness being spread and God being glorified through the whole nation. He was passionate about it since he was a young shepherd. And you read about it in Psalm 132. He said, I'm never going to rest till I find a place for that. And all his life, he was super focused and passionate about that objective. I was going to talk about these passionate guys. Let me talk about this first. That explains why, his passion for that explains to me why David, when he killed Goliath, remember what he did with the head of Goliath? He didn't just put it in his tent. He took it 30 kilometres away to Jerusalem and stuck it potentially on a pole in the middle of, it was called Jebus then, in the middle of Jebus, and said, he said, I'm coming for you because that's God's chosen place. And I believe there's a whole story around that David was the first to know that Jerusalem was God's chosen city, the first, because he was so passionate about it. And that's why, as soon as he became king over Israel and Judah, that's the first city he took, Jerusalem. So this whole event of 2 Samuel 6 is when the ark has been brought to Jerusalem. We'll just skip a few slides here. It's passionate guys. Oh, that's a good... ask me about this later. That's a great story. You guys were never around for the Sydney 2000 Olympics, but that was a massive event in Sydney. It was a spectacle. And to me, it sort of gives you an understanding what this event that we're going to talk about here was like for David. He was so excited. It was a massive event. There were 30,000 leaders, potentially over 1 million people there. You can do the maths. The colour, the spectacle. There was that much music, it says in the Chronicles record. They played with all their might. They were singing on and playing their harps and their stringings, tambourines, cymbals, trumpets, the lot. Reminds me of this Lebanese wedding I went to when Livia was a baby. It was that loud and noisy. Livia started screaming because of the noise. We had to take her outside, and then she proceeded to fall out of a pram and then freaked everyone out. That's another story. So then you've got David taking off all his kingly robes and shouting with his people and dancing with all his might, leaping in, whirling in this state of euphoria. This has been his whole objective, his whole life, his passion. The reaction of Michal, as we read, we didn't read this bit, but let's read verse 16. She looked through a window and saw King David leaping and whirling before Yahweh, and she despised him in her heart. This is David's best day ever. The biggest day of his life, honouring God and fulfilling a full-on lifetime ambition. And he's there blessing the people. He gave everyone gifts. It was the best day ever. He made offerings to God. Then at the end of that, that was the best day ever. He walks into his house, and we read in verse 20, Michal comes to meet him and says, how glorious was the King of Israel today. And so it goes on. What a letdown. And Michal, there's this sarcasm in her voice where she despises and mocks David for lowering himself with his people. She exaggerates. She said, you took all your clothes off. He went down to the linen garments because I believe he was thinking about the future Messiah that was the king priest. She had no spiritual awareness of the enormity of the occasion, what it meant. And that's why you read 3 times in this record here, she's Saul's daughter. Saul's daughter. She was just like her. It said to Michal, it was before Yahweh who chose me instead of your father. And at the end of the verse, I'll play music before Yahweh. See, his excitement and euphoria wasn't about his self-promotion. It was about honouring God and everything that meant to him. It was before Yahweh. And Michal just didn't comprehend the big picture. She wasn't spiritually focused, nor was she supportive of his passion in honouring God. And that's such a stark contrast to Abagail. And as a result of that, she had no children. It's a cameo of Jesus' Michal, isn't it? The Jews. He disrupted their life. He challenged them to live by higher principles for the benefit of others, and he was there to honour God. And in bitterness, they despised him and mocked him as a Messiah whose only objective was to honour God by saving people from all walks of life. And the Jews paid for that in AD 70 when they had to eat their own children. Remember that? In the siege of Jerusalem. So it's like a big echo back to this whole story of David. All right, lessons. Don't let the disappointments of our own life turn into bitterness or prevent you from rejoicing and supporting others in their excitement for God and expressing their feelings through what they do. Because you know what? That inspires people. When people are just all out for God and express it. Don't let the disappointments make you look at that and despise it. Be supportive of it. Value and support people who use their abilities and their opportunities like David to genuinely praise God. Whether it's speaking, music, coordinating events, practically being involved, being enthusiastic supporters. Value and support those people. I was at a combined weekend in Sydney just recently, and I don't know, there was a sister there that it was such a, I don't know, I didn't know how to take this, because there was a video clip of, I don't know if everyone's seen that Aaron Schuss song Zion. If you haven't seen it, you've got to see it. It's the most beautiful song about Jerusalem and the history of the Jewish people. You've got to see it. Anyway, in this combined weekend, they were playing a video clip of this guy with his band on the walls of inside Jerusalem at night. You know, and it was a bit out there. You know, it was a bit of a band and everything. But the music and the words were absolutely magnificent. And I'd never seen this. I don't know who she is. She walked past me to sit down and she said, "That's disgraceful. That's not Christadelphian." And I've been thinking about this Michal story, and I said, that's a Michal comment. Please, don't ever be like that. Don't ever be like that. And if possible, be an Abagail. And when you're confronted by people, I didn't think it was appropriate and didn't have the opportunity, but if possible, be an Abagail that can have a straight talk with people like Michal, because that attitude is so destructive. By doing that, we help realign each other for good. And I know that's a bit of a negative way to end this class, but in the next class we're going to meet, would you believe, Michal's brother, who's completely opposite, and that's so exciting. So we'll see you in a little while.
Well, thank you very much, Brother Paul, for that. Really loved the lessons that you brought out of those two stories there. And in particular, I loved the takeaway question of Are we going to be a thermometer or a thermostat? So thanks again to everyone who's contributed to tonight, and we're just going to close now with our closing song, Come and Let Us Go to the Mountain, and then Josh Evans will give a closing prayer and thanks for dinner.
All right, let's pray. Our awesome Father in the highest of heaven, we come to you now, a group of your young people enthused by your word. We have heard of the wonderful friends of David tonight. Help us to be like Abagail and calm others down, preventing them from sinning. Help us to be thermostats in situations of anger. Help us to be like David tonight, praising you with all our heart and showing our love to you, to all the world when we go home from here tonight. We realise that all things come from you, so we now thank you for the food we're about to eat. Help us to remember that all blessings come from you and to thank you daily for them. We ask now that you send your Son back to this earth so that this earth will be saved from this evil. We now ask this prayer through his name. Amen.
Well, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the May Double Study Day. It's great to see so many happy and smiling faces here tonight. Thanks very much, Uncle Paul, for your first study. It's especially nice to have Uncle Paul with us here tonight. Uncle Paul's flight was cancelled, and he was about to pass his notes on to Austin to give his studies, but luckily for us, he managed to he managed to find a last-minute flight to Adelaide, so we're very thankful for you joining us tonight. Big thank you also to Micah, Cora, Colin and Josh. Just got a few very brief announcements. I've put up the front a champion jumper that was left at one of our recent soccer games. Please collect that from the front if it's yours. We want to give a very big thank you to the team who have put up some amazing decorations for us to enjoy tonight to lead us into Hebron bookings opening after study 2. A lot of oxygen has gone into balloons and there's plenty of opportunities to take photos either in the foyer or up the back and to post those on Instagram. There's a hashtag on the mirror in the foyer if you want to post those photos. So yeah, a very big thank you to that team. And for dinner, we've got delicious burrito bowls and a massive thank you to Ruby Parcell and her team for all their work in preparing tonight's dinner for us. The cost for dinner is $10 and you can pay by bank transfer, cash or card, but we do prefer by bank transfer. If you do that, you'll just need to show proof of payment as you go to the front of the line. And if you want to pay by cash or card, somebody will be ready to take your payment. So please line up at the double doors like normal in this front hall. And as you go through, make your payment, collect a bowl and your toppings. And there's 2 tables, so make sure to get through quickly so you can eat your dinner. Collect a drink as well, and then come back into the main hall through the back double doors. If you have any dietary requirements, they are on the right at the end of the table. And dessert will follow after study 2, and trust me, you do not want to miss it. Study 2 will be at 7:30 p.m, and Uncle Paul is going to speak about David's best friend, Jonathan, and then after study 2, Hebron bookings open. So Josh has already said thanks for dinner, so as soon as those doors open, you can file through and enjoy burrito bowls.